Let's start. Welcome everyone again. Thank you for joining the webinar. My name is Axel Griffon, and I am a policy advisor at the Council of European Municipalities and Regions. We also call it CEMR. If you are not familiar with this organization, we are the largest association of local and regional governments in Europe, and we represent over 100,000 municipalities and regions in 40 countries. Our role is to advocate for strong local democracy and to support local and regional governments in addressing key European policy challenges, such as waste management, circular economy, or sustainability. And today's webinar is one of these key challenges, the implementation of the extended producer responsibility schemes for textile. As many of you know, all EU member states will be required to set up separate collection systems for textile waste by January this year. It marks a major step in the transition to a circular economy. And the ongoing revision of the Waste Framework Directive is also proposing a mandatory and harmonized EPR scheme for textiles, which means that producer will have to take financial responsibility for the collection and the recycling of textile waste. For local and regional governments, it brings both challenges and opportunities. They are already at the front of managing textile waste and ensuring efficient waste collection systems. But the introduction of EPR schemes will impact their role, responsibilities, and collaboration with producer, waste operators, and social enterprises. So this webinar is designed to help them to understand what's coming and prepare for the rollout of these new obligations. And today, our objectives are to raise awareness about the upcoming separate collection requirements and EPR schemes for textile, share best practice that from countries that have already EPR schemes in place, and facilitate the dialogue between local authorities, experts, stakeholders to ensure effective and transparent implementation. And we have a great lineup of speakers who will provide their insight into the different aspects of the topic. And I will present you the speakers quickly. Can we change slide, please? Yes, so thank you. The first speaker is Jordan Girling, is the head of the Extended Producer Responsibility at the organization called WRAP, and he will provide an overview of the EPR systems and the textile waste management in Europe. Then Marie-Jeanne Gartner, environmental policy lead at Reuse, will discuss the role of social enterprises in the management of used and waste textiles. And finally, sorry, my slide is wrong, but I just received the information that we have a representative from the city of Paris called Blanche Lascar. I think she's online, and I will give you the floor later, Blanche, so you can share practical insights from your experience with setting up an EPR scheme for textiles. We will conclude with a Q&A session where you will have the chance to ask our speakers any question. So before we begin, a quick note on the logistics. The webinar will last about 1 hour and is being recorded. If you have any question during the presentation, please feel free to type them in the chat and we will address as many as possible. Well, with that, let's dive in. And Jordan, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Axel. Can my slides be shared, please?
Yes, it's coming.
Thank you.
Oui.
Okay, perfect. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for taking some time to come and listen to me talk about extended producer responsibility for textiles this morning. CEMR have asked me to come and give a quick presentation about what's happening on an overview status, and that's why I'm here today. First of all, I will give you a quick overview about who I am and who RAP are. If we could move to the next slide, please. Can we move on to the slide?
Sorry, Jordan. Yes, it's coming. It's a bit slow, but it's coming.
That's okay. Thank you. So who are RAP? RAP is an acronym for the Waste and Resources Action Programme. We are a global environmental action NGO, and our focus is on transforming our broken product and food systems to create circular living for the benefit of the climate, nature, and people. And we work with governments and businesses and academia all over the world, and we have headquarters in the UK, the USA, and Australia. We have live projects in over 50 countries. And as of a press release tomorrow, we also have our RAP Belgium office in the EU opening too. A slide, please. And RAP strongly believe that environmental policy can play a really important role in pursuing a circular economy to help us tackle the climate and environmental problems that we're facing. Specifically, extended producer responsibility too. An extended producer responsibility at RAP is led by me, Jordan Girling, serving as head of EPR. My role requires me to work with various stakeholders across the EPR value chain. So sometimes I'm working with governments and policymakers to help design EPR systems for various waste streams, sometimes textiles, but sometimes things like plastics and waste electricals too. And I'm also working quite heavily with obligated producers and municipalities and councils too, to help them with their obligations under EPR. And I've been working with RAP for just over 1 year. And before joining RAP, I spent 10 years working on EPR in an environmental consulting capacity. Slide, please. Thank you. And once more. So very quickly, what is extended producer responsibility? That it's very important to note that there is no commonly accepted or universally accepted term for extended producer responsibility. This is a phrase that I like to use. So extended producer responsibility is a regulatory mechanism which is used to finance costs associated to the sustainable management of a product or its packaging once it reaches its end of life by placing such costs on manufacturers and sellers and producers. And if you could flick through the next 5 slides reasonably quickly, that would be great. Here are various other definitions of extended producer responsibility. I promise I am not going to read them all out. The purpose here is to show that everybody defines what extended producer responsibility is slightly differently. The concept is still the same. It's a regulatory mechanism used to finance the sustainable management of products. Slide, please. And what does extended producer responsibility actually mean for companies that are selling products? Well, companies which sell products have a number of obligations to comply with under EPR systems. Firstly, they need to register as a seller or what we call an obligated producer, hence the phrase extended producer responsibility. And they also need to implement some sort of system or arrangements to coordinate the collection and recycling of the products that they're selling. They need to submit systematic sales declarations so that they can pay appropriate EPR fees for the amount of products that they're selling. And there's also various single market requirements that the companies need to comply with. And what that means is sometimes there's requirements to mark products in a certain way so that consumers know what to do with them once they reach their end of life, or they need to give consumers certain types of information, things like that. Slide, please. And now I move on to perhaps the more interesting topic of an overview of textiles EPR in the EU and why we are having textiles EPR systems in the EU. So importantly, the EU strategy for sustainable and circular textiles was published several years ago now in March 2022. But in line with the publication of that strategy, a proposal to revise the EU Waste Framework Directive which would require the mandatory adoption of textiles EPR systems, that was published in July 2023. And importantly, like Axel pointed out at the beginning, that proposed revision to the directive would require EU member states to implement EPR systems for textiles. Now, really importantly, why do we actually need EPR systems for textiles? So there's a few figures at the bottom of this slide which explain that. So we know that 8 to 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from clothing and footwear, and the value lost every year due to clothing underutilization and lack of recycling is $460 billion. The European Commission announced that textiles have the fourth highest impact on the environment and climate change in Europe. So pretty big impact, and certainly needs some sort of system to help manage those products once they arise as waste. And last but certainly not least, the total volume of greenhouse gases emitted from textile production annually is 1.2 billion tonnes, which is more than emissions from all international flights and maritime shipping combined. Slide, please. Coming specifically onto the proposed revision to the Waste Framework Directive and what that actually means for EPR systems for textiles. So specifically, Article 22A is quite simple. It states that producers will be required to cover the costs of collecting and managing used and waste textiles. Article 22B sets requirements for producers to register, and that requires a harmonised registration format for all textile producers across every EU member state. Article 22C sets requirements for PROs, producer responsibility organisations for textiles. So an obligated producer that sells products, they must join a PRO in each EU member state and pay their EPR fees to that PRO. And then it becomes the PRO's obligation to coordinate the separate collection of used and waste textiles. And they need to use the EPR fees, which are paid by producers, to do that. And it's at that point where a PRO will almost certainly engage with local governments and municipalities to ensure that they have separate collection systems for used and waste textiles across the entire nation. And Article 22C also states that EPR fees must be eco-modulated. And what that means is some companies can get discounted fees for sustainable products, and conversely, other companies can get higher EPR fees if they're placing less durable or less recyclable products on the market in the first place. Slide, please. Article 22D sets a few requirements for the management of textile waste. So this first sub-point is really important. It states that used and waste textiles will be considered waste upon collection. So there is a caveat which says that used clothes which are professionally assessed for reuse at the collection point will not immediately be considered as waste. And that's clothes and textiles which are donated to a charity shop and things like that. Article 22D also states that textiles would be subject to sorting operations to ensure treatment in line with the waste hierarchy. There's a very big emphasis on reuse of textiles before recycling of textiles is necessary. And lastly, there will be obligations to support the reduction of illegal shipping of waste textiles under the guise of reusable textiles. They would be introduced. Exactly what they are is yet to be defined. And one of the annexes sets the product scope of textiles EPR, what actually is captured in the EPR systems for textiles. That's things like clothing and household linens and most types of footwear. And slides, please, Axel. Last slide on the EU. What are the timelines? Well, we know that separate collection of textiles was required in EU countries now, beginning of 2025. And in terms of EPR, it's expected that the proposed revision to the Framework Directive will be finalised during the Polish presidency of the European Council. And that runs from the beginning of January this year to the 30th of June. So, and once it is finalised, within 30 months of that finalisation, each EU country, they must have a national textiles EPR system. So those systems will be operational in every EU country by July 2027 at the earliest and December 2027 at the latest, presuming that the directive is indeed finalized during the Polish presidency of the European Council. Slide, please. There are some pioneering countries leading the way in the EU in terms of designing and implementing textiles EPR systems. RAP published this report at the beginning of 2024 to give an overview about countries which have made significant progress designing and implementing textiles EPR systems in the EU. You can download the guide using this QR code, free of charge, of course. We are a charity. Everything RAP does is free of charge. And then last but not least, the next slide, please, Axel. This is just a screenshot of one of the graphics from the guide. It gives an overview about some of the progress around the world made with textiles EPR systems. The guide, well, this graphic and the guide was published in January 2024. So there's been a bit of progress since then. For example, California finalized theirs in, I think it was October. There's been a little bit of other progress as well. But if we move on to the final slide, Axel, that concludes my brief overview about textiles EPR systems and what are the general requirements. And now I will pass back to the chair and we can open the floor for any questions towards the end, I believe.
Thank you very much, Jordan, for this great overview of the state of play of the EPR schemes. And now I would like to give the floor to Marie-Jeanne Gertner from the association Reuse, and she will walk through the role of social enterprises in the textile management and in the EPR schemes.
Thank you very much, Axel, and thank you to CMR for the opportunity to speak today. So my name is Marie-Jeanne Gartner and I'm Environmental Policy Lead at Reuse. And I will today present you the role of social enterprises in used and waste textile management and ultimately what it means for future EPR schemes. But first of all, I would like to present you a little bit more in detail what we do at Reuse. So we are the EU largest network of social enterprises that are active in reuse, repair, and recycling. We have currently 35 members spread across Europe in 30 countries. And our members work with, like in social insertion in the field of circular economy with having the focus of waste prevention and local reuse. And textiles represent a very important waste stream for our members because it's the biggest one in our network in terms of volumes and also revenues, but they work also with other types of waste streams like electronic waste, furniture, and a lot of others. Still in terms of members, so together our members collect every year more than 300,000 tons of textiles, and out of which they manage to reuse 47,000 tons locally. And by doing so, one single social enterprise can create between 20 and 35 jobs for 1,000 tons collected. So this gives you a little bit of an idea of what the sector represents and also like the job creation potential it carries. Before I go into the role of social enterprises in future EPR schemes, I would like to highlight one point that for me is very important, not only for me, but like it has a huge impact on the sector at the moment and also on the future of EPR schemes. And you might be aware of it already, but this is the crisis that the secondhand and recycling textile sector is facing at the moment. So what do we observe? We see that the sector is completely saturated. There are very few market opportunities at the moment, and this leads to a situation where sorters reach the limits of their storage capacities, so they have nowhere to sell anymore and they cannot store what they have. So we also see some collectors that start removing their bins from the streets because they can simply not collect. And as rightly said by Axel, we have now the obligation to mandatory collect textiles. So you can see how much of a problem we have right now, especially in this situation with the new obligation. And the root causes of the crisis that we are facing at the moment are multiple. The main one is certainly overproduction in fast fashion, which is saturating the chains, but also the rising operational cost within Europe, which makes sorting operation much more expensive, but also some geographical barriers. For example, some aspect of the global trade are changing, practices are changing, which leads us to this situation that drive threefold crisis: economic and social, because of the all the jobs that are at risk, and environmental, because we already see a lot of textiles that are in a situation to be reused or recycled that are currently being incinerated because of lack of other opportunities. So I thought it was very important to mention it first, and also to mention what we're doing in this regard and what we're asking for, like as an immediate solution to solve this crisis. So we are asking at Reuse to unlock an emergency funding mechanism until the EPR schemes are operational. Because as I said, we have this funding gap between the mandatory collection of textiles and the EPR schemes, which will come into play, as mentioned by Jordan, in 2027. So we have to find a solution during this time gap. Now, we just saw that for the moment, the sector is very fragile, especially at this very specific moment. But the question is, how can we build resilient textile recovery chains in the future, and looking at EPR schemes? So our perspective on this is that it's really important to involve and to preserve the role of social enterprises in future EPR schemes, because, as I mentioned, their priority is the waste hierarchy and the respect of the proximity principle, so an environmental objective. But beyond this, they, unlike other actors, they also provide jobs and training opportunities to people at risk of social exclusion. So they are key player in the just transition, but also thanks to this, they managed to create a virtuous circle where people, since they link donation to social benefits, it increased their motivation to donate. So we can see the two objectives that they have at core. And in terms of the central question of this webinar, how can we get textiles EPR right? I would like to share some very short three success factors that we identify for successful EPR schemes. The first one is to prioritize local reuse. The second one is what I just mentioned, to recognize social enterprises in EPR schemes. And the third one, but very important, is the financing aspect of EPR schemes. So to ensure the full cost coverage of all activities under EPR schemes, and also to have strong eco-modulation in place to tackle the environmental aspect of production. Now, deep diving into those points, about local reuse, one way to prioritize the waste hierarchy is to align EPR funding with it. We know that waste prevention, reuse have the most positive environmental outcomes, but we also know that it comes with greater upfront cost than other recovery solutions. So the EPR funding should be aligned with this reality. One important measure to prioritize reuse is also to set national targets for local reuse and preparation for reuse, and also to place them separate from recycling targets. So we really incentivize reuse, and also to make them quantitative. There are already good examples of targets that are existing. For example, in the French EPR, they even have now local reuse targets. So we know that's possible. And also to have a good monitoring all of this, to make sure that collection and sorting operations are under public authorities supervision. Now, deep diving into the second success factors to recognize social enterprises in EPR schemes, we should ensure the access to the waste stream for social enterprises, but also what's very important is to ensure that they maintain the ownership of what they collect after the collection and sorting process. And one very key aspect that is lacking for the moment in mostly all EPR schemes is the inclusive aspect of EPR governance. So to make sure that not only producers can decide about the functioning and the running of EPR scheme, but to make sure that all actors involved in those operations, like social enterprises, but also municipalities and other actors, can be given a decision-making power. Finally, looking at the financing aspect, it's key that EPR fees cover all the costs that are involved in textile waste management, so including collection, sorting, transport, but also residual waste after sorting, especially in the context that we know that sorters are receiving more and more of waste. So it represents for the moment a big cost for them. So this should be covered by EPR schemes. And we would like to see also earmarked funding for social enterprises. Again, this already exists, for example, in the French system, again, with the so-called Solidarity and Reuse Fund, which earmarked 5% of the EPR fees directly to activities of social enterprises. And finally, when it comes to eco-modulation, it should not only be based on eco-design rules, but also on the waste hierarchy and on business practices to make sure that we tackle the overproduction problem by making producers pay if they produce a lot, or like depending on the frequency of renewal of collection every year, for example. So this was a brief overview of our vision for EPR schemes. But now I would like to also give you a little hints of how local and regional authorities can collaborate together with social enterprises by sharing some best practices, mainly from our networks. I will start with a best practice from the local level. So from a municipality in Italy, the municipality of Vicenza, which in 2021 introduced a separate preparation for reuse fee. So basically, they put a higher fee for collectors if they prepare for reuse, so higher than, for example, the recycling fee, which has led to better preparation for reuse outcomes. And in addition of this, they also have reserved contract for social enterprises. So it's a good example of concretely how it can be done at the local level. But we also have an example from the regional level in Austria, in the province of Vorarlberg, where all municipalities committed to cooperate exclusively with social economy for the textile collection. And what is striking here is that this province also have now the highest per capita collection rate compared to other Austrian provinces. And in addition to this, they also set very strict criteria for sorting. And finally, I'd like to showcase how you can set up such a framework at the national level. And we see that in the Spanish law on waste and contaminated soil for the circular economy, which entered into force in 2022, and which mandates that the 50% of the tenders for the collection, transport, and treatment of textile waste should be reserved to social enterprise. Here, it's not completely new, because already at the moment, before this law, 60% of the contracts were actually already awarded to social enterprises, but it's more like a protective law to ensure that this remained the case. One of the issues with this is that there is no sanction or legal consequences in case of non-compliance. So to be kept in mind if expanded. This was my last slide. So I'm happy if you have any question at the end of the webinar to answer them. And thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Marie-Jeanne. Very insightful presentation, and it's very useful to see the good examples that you outlined. Now, diving into a case study, I would like to give the floor to Blanche Lascar, who will give a presentation about the current actions of the city of Paris. Blanche, would you like to try to share your screen?
Can you see my presentation?
Yes, perfect.
All right. Okay. My name is Blanche Lascar. I work for the city of Paris, and I'm going to present our relationship with the extended producers responsibility scheme for textiles. So I will talk about first how the textile collections work in Paris, and then how does the TLC, so textiles, linen, and shoes in French, work in Paris. So we have multiple ways to collect textile in Paris. The first is through mobile or normal waste disposal sites. These are handled by our staff and on our technical capabilities. Then there are outdoor drop-off points. So that has been already talked about by Marie-Jeanne Gärtner, for example. So they are on the streets. We do not own them, and we have a contract with the people who own them and who collect what's inside of them regularly. So we only make the outdoor space available for them. Then we are currently experimenting indoor drop-off points because we have problem with outdoor ones. They are often looted, and they can be degraded through graffiti or stickers, so they cost us sometimes a lot of money. So we are trying to put them now indoor. We are financed by the system operator, the French system operator, for that experimentation. So it's going well for now. The problem is that they don't collect as much, of course, as outdoor drop-off points, but it is fit for us right now. And then we have, of course, second-hand shops that we support that collect and reuse locally textiles. So they can be, the textiles that are collected can be reused in a Parisian shop. Even if they're collected in outdoor drop-off points, they can be recycled or turned into rag, or they can be shipped abroad, depending on their quality. Then I'm going to show you a bit of data. You can see here the amount of textile waste that we found in our residual waste bin throughout the years. So the quantities in Paris are really huge, and that's one of our problems. Basically, we could not give that type of quantity to our social businesses partners. It's too much. The percentage of the residual waste bin is quite stable in Paris. We are trying, of course, to talk about drop-off points, but it's still stable in our residual bin. So here you can see how much textile is collected through these drop-off points. We have 242 in Paris, and we collect about 3,000 tons per year. And it's the same amount that is collected in second-hand shops. And you can see here that there's also private collection points. So Refashion, our system operators, also uses these numbers. But you can see that in 2023, most of the collection was actually done by Paris, like by drop-off points that were allowed and enabled by the city of Paris. And you can see here regarding social businesses, Ecotextile is a private operator, but Le Relais and both of these businesses are also in insertion in social businesses. So how does the EPR function. You can see here the goals of refashion. So refashion actually used to be eco-textiles. They switched name, but they have been approved by the French state since 2009. So they're quite an old EPR, and we've been working with them for a while. So the first of their goals is to eco-design textile products through their to the money they give to textile producers, develop, repair, and reuse. We talked about that already. Raise public awareness as well. Finance communication initiative by local authorities, so that's us. Develop the collection of textiles and the recovery of textiles as well. And contribute to research and development projects on textile recycling. I did a little diagram so that you can understand how it works, and especially with us, the local authorities, because all of the control and the approval of refashion and in general system operators in France are done by the state. So the government approves refashion, and in return, refashion reports to the government annually. That control is done by the Agency of Environment. Then the producer contributes to refashion. 50% of what they contribute goes to eco-design, and 50% other gets to local authorities and collectors and social businesses. Then refashion also finances communication campaigns, and of course has contracts with local authorities. And we're gonna elaborate on that relationship because it's the one that I know the most. So we have contracts with refashion, and we can answer requests for proposal, for example. It's in that dynamic that we actually experimented indoor drop-off points. The request for proposal was called Reboost, and it was to improve textile collection. So we finance through that. We are also financed because we have drop-off points in our waste collection sites. And we can also be funded for our communication and our collection through mobile drop-off points and disposal sites. So you can see that refashion for us, if I go back to the last slide, does the middleman basically between a lot of partners, which for us is very interesting because that ecosystem is very technical and can be quite complicated for cities, especially small authorities. It also finances our projects in a moment where waste collection and disposal can be more and more expensive, and also fundings for local authorities is decreasing. And what was really interesting about what Marie-Jeanne Gartner also talked about is that we can see, especially in France, that there's a crisis of collection as well. So some municipalities were found to just have their textile being full and never collected because collectors would say that they could not collect them. It's not a problem yet in Paris. We're really glad. We're fortunate for that. But what was really interesting as well is that refashion actually increased the support that it gave to collectors to face that crisis. And it's something that we could have never done. So that's really interesting. The challenges of that relationship, though, is that the reports that we have to give to get funded are very heavy and very detailed. And at the moment, we haven't managed to get all of the funding we could have because the certificates that we have to give are so complicated and take so much time that it's not fit for us. So yeah, the reporting requirements are very heavy. And what I wanted to show you as well is that in a more general sense, you can see here the indicators that are overviewed by the Environment Agency in France. The quantities of textiles that are put on the market are not changing. And it's very complicated for us because even if like our textile collecting system would increase, even if we increase the drop-off points, we would never be able to absorb so much textiles. And you can see that the quantities sorted separately and properly disposed of are also quite similar. They are increasing, but not drastically. So that's something that we see local authorities. We have difficulties getting funding, and we also have difficulty seeing an improvement in our situation as collectors. So what are the lessons that we've learned? Technical position is necessary to follow the system operator. That's something that we inaugurated this year. Now we have one position completely devoted to EPR schemes, so that we can get all of the funding we can. The reporting can be very rigid, and that's something that municipalities in France are starting to report. They are starting to ask for more flexibilities and an understanding of the complication of the field. And the control of the system operator is also key for it to achieve its goal. So that's something that we noticed in other EPR as well. The French state is starting to fine the one that do not achieve their goals. And for what we know right now, refashion could be one because they didn't really reach their objectives in the indicators that are followed by the French Environment Agency. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Blanche, for this very interesting presentation. And I think it was really useful as well to see how it concretely works. I was particularly impressed by the numbers of arrows in your diagram, which means probably that it includes a lot of reporting and a quite technical process, as you mentioned. Just to start the discussion, I would like to ask all of you, the three speakers, one question. But before that, I just would like to remind to the participants that if they have any question, they can drop them in the chat, and I will be happy to ask them to the speakers. So the first question, of course, CMR is representing local and regional authorities. So I would like to learn from you, how do you think that they can ensure a good collaboration with all the stakeholders, from the producer to the social enterprises? So in the framework of these EPR schemes, if it's already here like it is for Paris, or if there is no EPR scheme yet, but it will come in the future. So could you give us a bit of insights on how to ensure this good collaboration? I will start maybe with Jordan.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to go first. I think it's a great question because it's really important to ensure that there's good collaboration across the entire value chain when these systems are being set up. There's a number of ways to do that. Although my preference leans towards a good governance structure being set up by producer responsibility organizations. And that can happen in a number of different ways. But one method that we've been seeing in a couple of other countries is maybe establishment of some sort of steering group for the PRO, which is made up of different stakeholders from various parts of the textiles value chain. And also quite an important point, not to necessarily try and create new industry groups which represent different parts like waste managers or collectors, but recognizing that actually a lot of these groups probably already exist in some form or another, so trying to utilize existing industry expert groups rather than creating unnecessary work in these steering groups and governance structures. That's my view.
Thank you very much, Jordan. Marie-Jeanne?
Yes, thank you for this question. I would agree with Jordan that the governance aspect is very important because, again, all actors need to be fairly represented. So it will also ensure collaboration, fair and transparent democratic systems. Then looking at the perspective of social enterprises to ensure good collaboration with them. Well, first of all, there are already plenty of cases of very good collaboration with local authorities and social enterprises. It depends a lot of the member state when this culture of collaboration is sometimes more present than in other cases. But I think now with the mandatory threat collection already in place, it's the perfect moment to ensure this continuous discussion between actors, between municipalities, social enterprises, who actually shares the same goals and missions, which is of general interest. So I think on that they can really share the same mission. And I think the best practices that I presented could be a good example on how to put this forward with reserve contracts or like specific fees that are incentivizing preparation for reuse, for example.
Yes, thank you very much. Moving to Paris, Blanche.
Well, I think it's something that we do right now, so it's interesting to talk about that. I think the key is flexibility. Flexibility from everyone. So asking first the system just to be more flexible and to answer the need of the local authorities. I think it's a win-win as well, because in France they have to spend the money that they collect. So if they answer our need, then we can help them achieve their objectives. And I think also that what we've done is trying to know which contract, like which secondhand shops were contracted with refashion, and if it was not the case, why? So sometimes we also do the middleman between social businesses and refashion. I think that's a really interesting role that local authorities can play. So yeah, not hesitating to work with one another and to have regular business meetings, and understanding how everyone functions as well, visiting each other's like I don't know, workplaces. I think that sometimes refashion also does not really understand how sorting and textile collection concretely works. So taking advantage of that ecosystem, I think, is really important.
Thank you, Blanche. Maybe I will stay a bit with you to build a bit on your statements. I would like to focus a bit on how you ensure transparency and accountability between all the different stakeholders involved in this EPR process. Do you feel it's transparent enough and that there is a clear relationship with everyone, or do you feel that it's a bit more top down approach, and you have no place to progress or to develop your own agenda in this process? Oh, you are muted, sorry.
First, I feel like relationships are quite clear. So the diagram that I showed you shows that even I understand, and I'm quite recent in my department. So I think it's clear for us. The problem of transparency, though, that we have is that in general, the textile production, sorting, and disposal is quite opaque, especially for our citizens. So that's the problem that we have. Basically, we have difficulties communicating informations about what the textile becomes, which means that generally our citizens are skeptical about using drop-off points, and that's our problem. And we feel like the EPR scheme has not improved that transparency. And despite like very like constant communication campaign, the problem is that the industry is so worldwide that it's very complicated to trace textile and to tell a citizen you put it in that box and it will get out there and it will be reused that way. So we have percentages, things like that, but it's still quite complicated for us. But in general, in our relationship, I know that collectors also are very control how we collect the textiles, so everybody kind of is transparent about how they work, and that's also how it works regarding our contract. So if we do not sort out the waste separately, we will not be funded as much as we could. So that's also the contracts also enable transparency.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have a question in the chat for you, but just before we address it, maybe Jordan and Marie-Jeanne, you have any views on this question of transparency and accountability?
Yeah, I'm happy to go. I think accountability and transparency is very important, and it's quite important to highlight that awareness campaigns for consumers, they are mandatory under the EPR systems, so that creates a level of transparency. But and there are some aspects included in the revised Waste Framework Directive which continue to mandate transparency. For example, the methodology for how EPR fees are calculated, it's mandatory for them to be available to everybody. So that is a mandatory form of transparency. But it is one thing me saying everybody's accountable and data transparency is really important and we should do that more. But then on the other side, we come to the issue of actually having the data. And a lot of the companies do not have the data which the systems need. And that is particularly prevalent when we're talking about small and medium-sized enterprises, which make up about 80% of the textile sellers. So transparency is really important, but we don't necessarily possess all of the data that we need. So that indicates to me maybe something should be done pragmatically to help companies gather data and give them advice and best practices on how to do that.
Thank you. Marie-Jeanne?
Yes, to elaborate on that, in my presentation, I mentioned targets and the importance of having preparation for reuse targets. And we know that one argument for the European Commission not to have targets, because they feel that it's not the right moment, is that we lack data. So I agree that it's extremely important to gather those data. So this time looking more at the end of the chain. And reporting requirements are very key, but then something that's also key, and I think that was greatly highlighted by Blanche, is the importance of having the flexibility and the means for it, financial means. So especially for social enterprises, there was a new provision added by the Council, by member states, that perhaps social enterprises operating outside of EPR schemes should also have a reporting requirement, which I think is completely fair. But then it's very important to ensure that they also have the financial means to operate this way.
Thank you very much, Marie-Jeanne. So let's look in the chat. I have 3 pending questions, and 2 are for Blanche for Paris. So first, the question is about reporting. So Marianne Haugland, who is actually the chair of the expert group on waste at CMR. So thank you, Marianne, for your contribution, and it's good to see you here. So about reporting, you said Blanche that it's so complicated, hence you don't get paid enough. So could you maybe elaborate a bit on that? And can you clarify who decides on how to report? And do you have any insight to share about it? Maybe sorry, Blanche. And I also ask you the second question from Tulia Inala from the Finnish Association of Cities and Regions, who ask what kind of contracts do you do between different operators? So how does it work between refinition, local authorities, and collectors and social businesses? So if you could a bit explain this.
So regarding the reporting obligations, basically, I think I can give you 2 examples. The first one is the Reboost call for proposal that we answered. Basically, it was a call for like that was France-wide, of course, because refashion is also France-wide, and So it was elaborated in a way that would not suit our needs. For example, one of the biggest refunding that was available was with the drop of points. So they could refund us the drop of points if we bought them, but we did not want to buy them, and we already did basically our project without buying them. So what was remaining to refund was staff, basically. And that is our biggest expense. So collecting, but also mobilizing our staff, because having that kind of indoor drop-off points also goes with training and being able to tell people what to put in the box and so on. But that is only refunded to 11%. So most our expenses in that project are actually not covered by refashion and that call for proposal. So that's the first problem. So that's was talking about flexibility. Sometimes we have projects, but they do not fit what refashion is able to offer. And the other problem is that they can be audited by the French government. So they are really keen on having a lot of data, dates, how much money we spend on that thing. So for example, we can be paid um, when we collect things, which we do with our mobile waste disposal centers. But to do that, we have to give 3 certificates: the certificate of how many tonnage we collected, the certificate of who collected them, and also we have to use refashion's communication material, which for us as a city is a bit problematic because it kind of blurs the message for our citizen. And those 3 certificates have to be given 3 months in advance. We do occasional collection every day. So the reporting is so enormous to get the money. I think it's 300 euros per collection, that we just could not do it. We didn't succeed, actually. We could not do it. So that's some example.
And
we
regarding the contracts?
Yeah. So regarding the contracts, we have a contract, just a relationship with Refashion, and then I think we do different contracts when we have project together. But the original contract allows us to be refunded for collection, for communication, and also they are designing right now a turnkey system to collect in schools, which is really interesting for us, but they did not actually added communication action. And we told them that as a city, it's impossible to do a collection without communicating to school and to the children. That's the most important thing for us. So that's our first contract with Refashion. And local authorities and contractors. So with collectors, we have a convention basically that allows them to use the public space, and that tell them, I think, the rate of how much they must collect so that we don't have problem afterwards. We have a frequent relationship with them. We also involve them in that project of indoor drop-off points. And social businesses, we subsidize them. So we also have convention for these subsidies that can be detailed or not, depending on what we want. So we subsidize them for a period of 3 years, but we can review the amount of subsidies each year, but that allows them to program for a long term. So I hope it's clear.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you very much, Blanche. I have a question for Jordan. Do you think one single PRO will help improve transparency and not competing existing PROs?
Thank you for the question. I do think that one single PRO helps to facilitate transparency. That's partly because when there's numerous PROs operating at the same time, it creates a level of complexity whereby all of the data and information needs to be amalgamated into one set to show an overall picture and performance of the system. In terms of the consumer awareness campaigns that it's mandatory for producer responsibility organizations to run, it could be confusing if different PROs are delivering different campaigns at the same time if they're not aligned. There is a provision in the Framework Directive which states that if more than one PRO is operating, the regulator can give the obligation to run the awareness campaigns to an external body, which is not a PRO. But that depends on if there's an external body that's ready and capable of doing such campaigns. So to answer the question, I think one PRO does facilitate good data transparency, but please don't construe that as me recommending that one PRO is always best, because there's pros and cons to both. There's one PRO for textiles in France, but there's two in the Netherlands that I'm aware of. So there's pros and cons to both in various aspects. But I feel like I've answered your question, and I won't dive into that rabbit hole right now.
Thank you very much, Jordan. Maybe a last question before we close the webinar. So from the chat, I see the question: to Blanche in Paris? How is the textile collection system funded in Paris? Is it through a municipal waste tax, a national scheme, or a combination of both?
I would say a municipal waste tax, but also the fact that we do not own or collect would tell me that it might be free. And I think Jordan Gerling could tell if I'm wrong or right. Having an EPR allows you to have free collection. It's the work of Refashion to collect freely textiles. So I'm not sure we're actually paying for it. And if we are paying for it, Refashion is supposed to refund us. So that's when I could say that it's a bit opaque for me, but also I'm not the original speaker, so maybe she would have answered better than me.
Okay, maybe just I also give the floor maybe to Marie-Jeanne and Jordan on this question. Do you have anything, maybe not only focusing on Paris, but for other municipalities? Do you know what is the general trend?
Marie-Jeanne, would you like to go first?
Go ahead, Jordan, if you want to answer.
I don't have too detailed comments, but yes, the concept of extended producer responsibility is that the producers finance the entire costs of collection and recycling, not partial costs. So the cost that producers pay for their EPR fees to Refashion, that should also funnel down to municipalities and councils to help fund the separate collection, not help entirely fund separate collection. So it should be funded entirely by the producers.
And maybe from Marie-Jeanne, the practical views, how it works.
Yeah, so I know more like the perspective, of course, of our members. So for social enterprises, and I know that's actually, I think, a very interesting point. In France, the French EPR for the moment covers the cost of sorting for sorters, but not the cost of collection at the moment. So that's something important to take into consideration, because it's quite clear that from the revision of the Waste Framework Directive that they will have to, PRO will have to cover the cost of collection, sorting, transport, so everything. And I'm still wondering how it will then change in France, because I think they will have to transport the directive and then adapt. I think that their plan might be to do it more like via call for project, as mentioned by Blanche, the financing of the collection, but this might change soon.
Thank you very much for this insights. Well, we had a very interesting discussion. I would like to thank all the speakers. Just as a conclusion, I would like to recall that, of course, with this new obligation to collect textile as from this year, and the increase of textile waste caused by fast fashion trend, it can lead to a crisis of textile, as it was shown by Marie-Jeanne in her presentation. But along these challenges, we also found out that there are solutions that exist in Europe and all across the world. So CMR recommendation is to continue to move forward with this process. First, at the EU level, we advocate to advance this EU legislation, this ongoing revision of the Waste Framework Directive. And we hope that the mandatory establishment of EPR will be implemented as soon as possible to support municipalities in this process. And then moving to the more territorial level and how things will work in practice. So what we learned today is that maybe there is a need to simplify the process and ensure flexibility in these schemes. Of course, a clear role and responsibility through transparent governance is key to ensure a good collaboration with all the different actors of the chain. And then my last point is maybe the cornerstone of all this is how we fund it. So ensure that we have adequate funding for municipalities and regions, particularly for smaller municipalities. I cannot imagine how it can work in a smaller city than Paris. So it was really interesting to hear all this debate and this presentation. I invite you to stay tuned with CMR activities. We are following the legislation developments and we are supporting our members in this process to empower them to better tackle this textile waste management. So thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for your contribution and see you soon. We are available. The recording will be available on the website, and we will also share the presentation of the speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.